if you want a 40-year-old car as your first car, that might not be such a stupid idea, considering they are exempt from tax and MOT, and insurance tends to be way cheaper considering you can go through classic policies. So these are some options that you might want to consider that are older than 1985, and they're actually pretty cool, more than your standard MGBs and stuff. We start with the famously indestructible Mercedes W123, which was Mercedes' medium-sized saloon car back in the 70s and 80s. This thing is actually a great starter car, believe it or not. Despite the three-pointed star, this thing is actually very easy to run, thanks to its famously indestructible engine and its tank-like bodywork. So it's not only reliable, it's also safe. It might not be so good on fuel considering it is a 2 litre, however, your insurance is surprisingly low. I ran a quote on Haggerty and I got a very reasonable £760. Now if you thought the Mercedes was too big and too powerful and the engine was too large, maybe get what your dad probably would have had, a Fiesta 1.1, the Mark II. In fact, Mark 1s are very, very expensive now, so the Mark II is probably your best bet if you want an older Ford. Now, these things are, well, they're not as cool as the Mercedes, but I mean, they've still got that retro Ford appeal, and because they are, well, they're quite rare these days, there aren't many normal Mark II Fiestas around, these might become sought after classics. I mean, they are old Fords at the end of the day, and the nice thing is that your insurance won't be too bad either. This next one is another surprisingly reliable pick. These older Peugeot 304s are pretty robust if you know what you're doing in terms of maintenance. However, the only problem is the 304s are quite rare nowadays, a lot of them are rusted away. However, if you want one, you might end up with a convertible, which I guess is no bad thing. Considering a lot of people will go for NGBs, these might be a more interesting second choice. They are front-wheel drive, so they are a bit safer in terms of handling, and they have a 1.3, so they're better on fuel. You can get the 1.3S, which has 75 horsepower, as opposed to the normal one, which has around 55. So you get a very pretty looking car that's probably not as reliable, however, it's still very cool. Another much cooler alternative is the Fiat X1. Now I was surprised that you could find early ones for so cheap because prices have gone down since COVID. These were the first affordable mid-engine sports car. In fact, these came with a 1.3 or a 1.5 litre engine, both very insurance-friendly choices. And they are mid-engines, so that obviously limits practicality. However, you do get 2 boots. They aren't reliable, I mean, they are Fiats at the end of the day, but you get this very cool wedge shape with pop-up headlights, and they made thousands of these, so parts are very readily available. They also have a targa top, so you can use it all year round, although considering it is a Fiat, I probably wouldn't do that. However, insurance is still very, very cheap. Now, the Porsche 924, the basic Porsche, which probably wouldn't be a stupid buy at all, considering it has a Volkswagen engine. So these things are definitely the more modern choice, even though they were built around the late 70s. These things are very cool. They still have that sort of retro Porsche shape. They have pop-up headlights and a big boot. And you can get them with a proper Porsche engine, although that probably won't be very good on insurance or fuel, so I would stick with the base 2 litre. However, you do get a 4-seater coupe with a 5-speed manual gearbox and rear-wheel drive. However, these are the most expensive to insure on the list, unfortunately. Now, for a genuinely reliable car, why don't you get a Saab 90? These mid-80s models have become quite affordable and a bit more plentiful because people are restoring them. And they're pretty reliable choices, even though they do basically have a Triumph engine, which was completely reworked using much better materials by much better engineers. These have 4 seats, they come in a coupe or a saloon. They do not have a turbo, unfortunately, however you can get them with a 5-speed manual, and if the aeroplane ads weren't enough, these do come with a fastened seatbelt light, which is weird, but these are quite cool actually, and they're very cheap to insure because there aren't many of them. The Triumph 2000, okay, normally I wouldn't recommend Triumph as a brand. I mean, they haven't got the best track record. In fact, they've got a terrible track record. However, the 2000 was basically designed to compete hilariously with BMW. In fact, this rather normal looking saloon car has a 2-litre straight 6, which actually sounds amazing. And considering not many people are buying these as young drivers, they are very cheap. Cylinder, they're actually pretty cheap to insure, which is very surprising. Now, the most popular choice on this list might be the Volkswagen Beetle. Now, the reason is it was just so popular, there are still loads and loads of them out there for sale and still on the road, and these make great first cars for those people who enjoy working on them. You can build a Beetle into whatever you want. There are loads of parts manufactured. You can basically lower it, you can raise it, you can turn it into a track car, you can do whatever you want. I mean, the Beetle is basically built like Lego, so you can basically change anything on the car for a fairly reasonable price. Beetles were built to be customised, and that's why this would be the perfect car for anyone who would want to modify their first car. And lastly, we have the mid-80s Renault 5. Now, a modern Renault 5 is still out of reach for new drivers. However, that's not to say that you can't get an original Renault 5 and probably modify it to make it look like a Gordini or a Turbo 2. You can have a characterful first car that is just amazing to look at, and it's just a very sweet little car that has so much charm and personality that everyone will love it. And it's cheap on insurance too because it's got such a tiny little engine. So there are some drawbacks, I get it. They're not that safe, and they're probably less likely to survive during winter, and they're not as well equipped. However, if you are thrifty and you know what you're doing when it comes to maintenance, then maybe this might be the way to go if you're looking to save money with your first car.